Welcome to the Generation of Prayer podcast. My name is Ryan Randy, the young adult pastor at Hope City in Fredericton, and I'm joined by Spenser Mason, the young adult pastor at Glad Tidings in Moncton, and Justin Allen, the young adult pastor at King's Church in St. John. Our heart is to see this generation of our region united in consecration, humbly and boldly seeking the face of God, being satisfied with nothing less than his manifest presence. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the podcast. All right, well, we are excited to finally be here. Generation of Prayer podcast. This is our intro episode, and we just believe that God's doing a work in our region in this generation. We're not here to talk about what we're doing or how we brought it. We're just observing what God's doing, and we want to talk about that. And so really this intro episode is just our heart behind the podcast and what God's doing in our region. So I'm just going to open up with a question. How have you guys been seeing the stir towards prayer within this generation? Or in other words, what's your heart for being here? What are you seeing your local ministries, your local mission in your context?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump right in. Yeah, there's just been this sense of hunger for a genuine encounter with the Lord that I've seen in this generation. Like, not the fluff, not the fanciness, just a genuine relationship with the Lord. And ultimately that comes through prayer. Prayer is communication with God. And so when you're looking for a genuine encounter with him and experiencing him and knowing him, it's through his word, it's through prayer. And so like that is just, I've seen that just stir in people's hearts, recognizing the necessity that prayer really is the thing. Like that's how we walk in communion with the Lord, and that's how we experience him. That's how we know him. So that's what I've seen, and that's just continued on, from maybe a small little flame, and then it's like prayer is something where the more you pray, the more you want to pray. Mm-hmm. It's like this fire that just builds and builds and builds, and so as people begin to encounter and grow in their life of prayer, that just gets bigger, and it's infectious. It just floods through communities, it floods through churches. And we've seen this in our group. I know you guys have seen it in yours as well. And when we come together for specific events that we do together, it's like it's one community that is experiencing the same thing. And so it's just been beautiful.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that even on our end too, that's one of the things I've noticed is just a hunger for prayer specifically. The amount of young people who would show up to pre-prayer gatherings and who just kind of like want to pray for one another and who are actually stepping into a real relationship with the Lord outside of an intellectual knowledge, of like, oh yeah, I know about Jesus, but now through prayer, I'm actually encountering him, whether it's praying the scriptures or whether it's just like, and there's lots of different types. And we've done, lots of teachings on types of prayer, which I think is important, but there's a heart posture that just says, I want to engage with God, and I've seen that really been stirring with a lot of people, and that's been encouraging.
Yeah, I've been to the pre-prayer at the salt mine, and if you want to get stirred, what I've noticed, I think, in the context of prayer, even just this generation, is Gen Z is tired of doing church, like you guys have a weekly gathering, 6 p.m., 5 p.m. is like open to anyone who wants to come and pray. And even your turnover rate of people showing up, it's like almost half of those that are at your gathering are at pre-prayer. And noticing that, seeing that there, and then I've seen that kind of spread, that same emphasis of like the small turning into a lot. I think it's like originated with like, whether they've grown up in church or not, doing the church thing isn't satisfying anymore. They've seen it fail. They've seen it not work. And I think of like 1 Kings 18, like when Elijah goes and tells King Ahab, like, go and look for the cloud. Like, it hasn't rained for 3.5 years. And he's like, well, goes 7 times, sees this small hand, like coming up over the horizon. He's like, that's where the rain's coming. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. It's like, it doesn't make sense. I don't see how it happens. So many people would count Gen Z out, count Gen Z short, but it's like, I see a hand over the horizon and it's just this small flame that's like embers building, like the heat is there. And it's like, how are we just stoking this? And they're hot and they're hungry and they have a deeper capacity for God and the things of him, hunger for his presence. And it's just amazing to see.
Yeah, it is, man. It's really exciting. And that's what I love about like what we're like aiming to do here with this podcast is to just like acknowledge what God's doing in this generation and then to like share our heart. It's like, okay, how do we as leaders, stir their hearts, encourage them, and pour gasoline on the fire of the thing God's already doing.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? To see them come alive and to see our province, impacted and changed.
You go.
I think just something so important about prayer, like in this hour too, is that it really does break down walls.
Yeah.
Cross-denominationally, in coming out of times where division between denominations, maybe even churches. But in this generation that's hungry for the Lord and for prayer, it's like prayer is a language that it doesn't matter what your theological background is. Like everybody understands the importance of prayer.
Yeah.
Everybody can unite around that. And so, we can throw off our things that have maybe divided us in the past and we can rally around prayer, seeking God.
Yeah.
There's this like realness beyond the just religion and religious activity. It's like students are looking to people that have either grown up in church or not, but they've had an experience with the living Christ.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, something's happening here. And that happens through prayer. That happens through like a hunger and desire, again, not just to do church or to do a worship service or to do prayer. It's like you've experienced the manifest presence of God and all the walls begin to crumble. And I think that's our heart here. Yeah. Our heart is just to say like, hey, we're not coming to just start a podcast to say, hey, how can we usher something in? How can we create something and create a hunger? It's like the fact that we're here is just the fact that God is stirring a hunger and we're just observing it.
He's already doing it. Absolutely.
And it's like, okay, God, like how do we steward this? How do we whatever? But like, we just want to display and put you on display to what you're already doing and just be a part of it in any way that we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. So our heart in the unifying of this for this podcast is to call a generation to prayer. Yeah. We are all represented of 3 different cities in our region, in our province, leading different communities. But we just felt that a podcast really brings a reach to all of our individual communities and beyond, different rural areas of young adults in our city that maybe aren't a part of communities or recognizing what God's actually doing and saying, hey, there's something happening in this generation. And we want to call a generation to prayer, believing that any fruit, any impact, any power comes through prayer. I've been so encouraged by this quote that I think just echoes our heart so boldly. But Andrew Murray says, the man who mobilizes the Christian church to pray will make the greatest contribution to world evangelization in history. And it's like, okay, God, that's it. Above our outreach events, above everything else, like if we can call a generation to prayer, to seek God in the secret place.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important distinction, like with that quote, because it's like sometimes prayer can falsely kind of be accused, I guess, so to speak, of like wanting to just hide and pray and not do any work and not want to get out there and share the gospel and be the hands and feet of Jesus. Oh, we just want to hide away and pray. But it's like when you begin to give yourself to prayer, you're not going to be hiding. Like your heart's going to be stirred and you're going to go. So evangelism, spreading the gospel and prayer are hand in hand. Like they go together 100%.
Yeah, it's good. I think of like the Mary Martha story, right? It's like Jesus doesn't rebuke Martha because she had a heart to do things. He rebuked the order of her devotion.
Her
like the devotion was like first given to works. And Jesus says, no, what Mary has chosen won't be taken. Like it's found first at my feet and everything else flows from that. So that's true. We can find ourselves in the place of like doing things for God and lacking the heart of God.
Yeah.
The secret place is where we get the heart of God, where we can't help but go and share.
Yeah, absolutely. I just feel, and it's so important because if we're not helping people actually connect to the heart of God, then what are we doing? Right? Like, were we just trying to create a bigger ministry? Or are we just trying to like fill rooms? And are we just trying to like, and I think that doesn't produce eternal fruit. And I think so to like communicate to the young adults in this region, like the importance of just you connecting with God authentically. Because otherwise, we've seen it, and even in our generations, like, a little bit older, it's like you've seen the people who did all the things.
Right.
But they didn't lean into who God was. They knew about him, but there was so much deeper. And it's like, we got to get the cart before the horse,
It's good.
Or the horse before the cart, But Right. Like we have to burn. And then like to your point, Spencer, doing the things becomes easier when you're burning, when you've connected with God.
Right.
And so I think like for me, that's my heart for what I would like to see come from this podcast, from all the initiatives that we're doing, is that a generation connects with God and then he sends them and he ignites them and then they walk in a true, authentic relationship that's inspiring. You know, that's what it means. Like, well, you want to be light? Well, you know, let him light you on fire and just be.
Yeah.
You don't have to try. You
it's
just
good.
are, because you're in relationship.
Well, it's like John Wesley, right? He would talk about, you know, his power and his methodology, so to speak, and being so effective in preaching in the gospel. And he said he would set himself on fire. People would come to watch him burn.
That's it.
That's what happened.
Yeah, man.
good.
Yeah. So I think that's what I want to see, you know, and for any part that we can play, I want to see a generation just be lit up and then watch God transform this region.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard it said, and just close this episode with this, but John Tyson says like expectancy without agenda. And I think that's the heart of like, okay, God, we've all come from different backgrounds, but just light this generation on fire, and whatever that looks like, we're here for it.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to take over. We don't want to lead this thing. We just want to watch you show up.
Yeah.
And continue to feed the hunger of this generation, because we can't. Like, I would be so burnt out trying to like appease the hunger that I'm seeing in this generation, because it's not my job. It's the Holy Spirit's job.
Yeah.
So the vision for this podcast, why we're doing this, called Generation of Prayer, is really this. We're going to do a few episodes leading up to what we call a regional Generation of Prayer event. So on Saturday, April 26th, we are having our first ever regional Generation of Prayer, hosted by yours truly, in St. John. And we're just calling a generation to prayer. And we would love to gather with young adults from across the region, the Maritimes, to gather to simply seek the face of God and be satisfied with nothing less than his manifest presence.
Yeah.
And we believe that if that's our genuine, true, pure heart, God is going to show up in ways that we could never fabricate or create on our own.
Yeah.
So all that to say, we want to thank you for joining us for our intro episode, Hearing Our Heart. But we are going to get right into things. Episode 1 is released, so make sure you jump on over there and join us for that.